Karen's voice sliced through the forest like a chainsaw, shrill and relentless, accusing me of ruining the neighborhood with my cabin's unsightly firewood pile. The irony was thicker than her waistline. She, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was trespassing on my land, screaming about rules that didn't apply. I leaned against my cabin's porch railing, the cool mountain air brushing my face, and watched her tirade unfold. Karen, all 300 pounds of her, stood in my clearing, her neon pink tracksuit clashing with the serene pines. Her jowls quivered as she waved her phone, threatening to call the sheriff. "You think you're above the law, don't you?" She spat, her eyes narrowing with that signature Karen glee, self-righteous, smug, and utterly convinced she held the moral high ground. She'd been gunning for me since I moved here 6 months ago, a city transplant seeking solitude in this quiet county. My cabin, modest but mine, sat on a sprawling plot I'd inherited from my grandfather, a man who'd practically built this town. Karen didn't care about legacy. To her, I was an outsider, a threat to her meticulously curated vision of rural perfection. The conflict had started small petty complaints about my truck's tire tracks or the unapproved wildflowers I'd let grow. But today, she'd escalated. She'd caught wind of my firewood stack, a neatly arranged pile I'd chopped myself, and decided it violated some obscure HOA bylaw. Never mind that my property wasn't even part of her jurisdiction. The HOA's reach ended a mile down the road. But Karen's ego knew no boundaries. She'd marched onto my land, uninvited, and now stood accusing me of vandalism for living my life. "You're a disgrace," she bellowed, her voice echoing off the trees. "This eyesore is lowering property values. I'm calling the sheriff." I smirked, sipping coffee from my chipped mug. "Go ahead, Karen. Call him." She froze, her finger hovering over her phone. My calm rattled her. She expected panic, compliance, maybe an apology. Instead, I gave her nothing but a steady gaze. The truth was, I wasn't just some random cabin dweller. My grandfather's name was on half the buildings in this county: schools, libraries, even the sheriff's station. I didn't flaunt it, but I wasn't about to let this wannabe dictator bulldoze me on my own land. Minutes later, a patrol car crunched up the gravel path. Sheriff Dan Carter stepped out, his boots kicking up dust. Dan and I went way back: high school football, late-night fishing trips, the works. He was a good man, fair but no nonsense, with a dry sense of humor that cut through bullshit like a hot knife. Karen's face lit up as she saw him, assuming she'd won. She waddled toward him, her voice pitching higher with every step. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. This man," she jabbed a finger at me, "is defacing private property. That firewood is a hazard, and he's refusing to comply with HOA regulations." Dan raised an eyebrow, glancing at the tidy stack of logs by my shed. Then he looked at me, leaning casually against the porch, and I swear I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "That's so, Jake?" he asked, his tone neutral but his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Yup," I said, shrugging. "Apparently, my firewood's a threat to civilization." Karen's face reddened. "Don't you dare mock me. I'm the HOA president. I have authority here." Dan scratched his jaw, his badge glinting in the fading light. "Authority? Huh. Karen, you mind telling me exactly where your HOA's jurisdiction starts and ends?" She faltered, her confidence cracking. "Well, it's the entire community. This area is under our oversight. Dan chuckled. A low, rumbling sound that made Karen flinch. That's funny. 'Cause last I checked, Jake's land ain't part of your HOA. In fact, this whole plot, he gestured at the rolling hills around us, is deeded to the Harlan family. You know, the folks who donated the land for the county courthouse. And the fire station. And, oh yeah, my office. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She hadn't expected this. She'd assumed her title as HOA president gave her unchecked power. That she could bully anyone into submission with a phone call and a scowl. But Dan wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a calm, dangerous drawl. Karen, you're trespassing. Jake could press charges if he wanted. And that firewood, it's on his property, cut from his trees, for his cabin. You got no business here. The air grew heavy, the silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Karen's bravado crumbled. She clutched her phone tighter, as if it could save her. But the community standards. She stammered. Dan sighed, rubbing his temples. Lady, the only standard you're breaking is common sense. Now, I suggest you leave before Jake decides to get less neighborly. I couldn't resist. Yeah, Karen, maybe focus on your own backyard. I hear your lawn's looking a little unapproved. Dan snorted. And even the bystander, a quiet guy named Tom who'd tagged along with Karen, probably against his will, cracked a smile. Karen's face turned purple, her hands shaking with rage. She'd been humiliated, and she knew it. But she wasn't done digging her own grave. You'll regret this, she hissed, pointing at me. I'll have your cabin condemned. I'll sue you for defamation. That's when Tom spoke up, his voice shaky but clear. Karen, stop. You're making it worse. He was a skinny guy, always nervous around her. But something in Dan's words had emboldened him. You can't just barge onto people's property and make up rules. It's not right. Karen whirled on him. Shut up. Tom, you're just a tenant. You don't get a say. That was her mistake. Tom's face hardened. He'd been under her thumb for years, paying exorbitant HOA fees while she lorded over the neighborhood like a tyrant. Her dismissal of him was the final straw. I'm done, Tom said quietly. I'm reporting you to the board. The Real board. Not your little fan club. Karen's eyes widened, panic setting in. The HOA board wasn't her puppet anymore, not since the last election, when her allies had been voted out. She'd been clinging to power through bluster and intimidation. But now her reign was unraveling. Dan tipped his hat to me. Jake, you need anything else? You let me know. Karen, let's go. I'll escort you off the property. She sputtered, her protests incoherent. But she had no choice. Dan's hand rested lightly on his holster, not threatening. Just a reminder. She shuffled toward her car, muttering about lawsuits and injustice. Tom trailed behind, looking like a man who'd just broken free from chains. As their cars disappeared down the road, I sat on my porch, the stars emerging above the pines. The quiet returned, the kind of peace Karen could never understand. She'd tried to wield her title like a weapon, but she'd underestimated this county. Power doesn't come from a title or a phone call. It comes from knowing your place, your people, and your roots. The next week, word spread. Tom had followed through, filing a formal complaint with the HOA board. Others joined him, tired of Karen's overreach. By month's end, she was ousted as president. Her name a punchline at the local diner. She tried to sell her house and leave. But the low property values she'd ranted about came back to bite her. Her gaudy McMansion sat on the market for months, a monument to her hubris. I never saw her again. Some said she moved to a gated community in Florida, chasing another throne to claim. Others said she was still writing angry letters to the county, demanding apologies no one would read. Either way, her reign was over. I stacked another log on my firewood pile, the axe heavy in my hands. The county was mine not in some arrogant, Karen-esque way, but in the way that matters, through history, through sweat, through belonging. Let her call the cops. Let her scream. Out here, the trees don't care about her rules. And neither do I.